From planned-out rivalries to generate hype, to fighters using fake personas for fame, many people out there believe that the UFC is all fake, and here's the reason. The skeptics that believe this theory range from casual fans to hardcore enthusiasts who have followed the sport for years, and many of them point to the over-the-top WWE-style antics that some fighters employ as evidence of the UFC's supposed fakeness. Since these antics usually tend to expose the scripted nature of other combat sports, such as professional wrestling, the fans think of them as a legitimate reason to be suspicious of the UFC's authenticity. Then, there's also all the violence that might make some people believe that it's all fake. I mean, the fights can get quite gory at times. So much that they even start looking unreal, which is where the concept of UFC being fake might sneak in. And that's not all though. The non-believers of UFC also recall moments where fighters seem to be pulling their punches, or even purposely losing as evidence that the fights are staged. So, it's certainly true that the UFC can be dramatic at times, but not fake. From Conor McGregor's epic trash-talking to the intense stare-downs that take place before fights, there's no shortage of theatrical moments in the UFC. According to UFC fan Rafael Arono on Quora, the UFC is a real sport where genuine contests happen. But is there any truth to all these claims? First of all, I'll be honest. The UFC does push a narrative. They present their fighters in a certain way and market them to make millions at PPVs and sellout arenas. This is why they may promote fights with animosity, backstage storylines, or simply create drama to sell their events. But what happens inside the cage is 100% genuine. Although, there's one part of the UFC that might be scripted. The fighters' personalities. You know what I'm talking about. Some fighters create these larger-than-life personas that just aren't true to their real selves. Yep, that's right. All of this is done to generate more buzz around their fights and make more money. And who can blame them, right? Take Colby Covington, for example. When he first started in the UFC, he was just a chill guy who never said anything mean to his opponents. But after being told he might get fired in 2017, he decided to take things up a notch and create this whole bad guy persona.
Tomorrow night, I'm gonna let my balls hang on this filthy animal's face, live on pay-per-view. Don't miss it, let's go!
Colby Covington, ladies and gentlemen.
And guess what? It worked! He's now a title contender and much richer for it. And everyone knows that he doesn't need much help from the organization because the big guy understands that to sell tickets and PPVs, he must cause chaos between himself and his fellow fighters. And Covington isn't the only person who's used a fake persona to his advantage. Chael Sonnen isn't too far behind either. Not just him though. Fighters like Conor McGregor and, more recently, Jake Paul have also become superstars by playing the bad guy. And it's helped them get better opportunities and higher payouts. I mean, think about Ronda Rousey. She was marketed as invincible to the point where they almost sold us that she could beat men in the octagon. Of course, she can't, and she got beat up by an elite striker, Holly Holm. Even Nate and Nick Diaz are promoted as two urban guys that can fight at an elite level. George St. Pierre is an elite athlete that is basically the epitome of a good guy. TJ Dillashaw was marketed as a snake, aka someone that can't be trusted. And Holly Holm, on the other hand, was promoted as the preacher's daughter, the all-American good girl. So the list goes on and on. And another smart marketing strategy that the UFC uses is selling rivalries. Now, we've all seen those intense face-offs at weigh-ins where fighters are nose-to-nose, jawing back and forth. It's hard not to think they really hate each other, right? Well, the truth is, a lot of time it's just for show. Fighters create drama to get people more interested in their upcoming fights. It's all about marketing and building hype for the event. So, you might hear fighters saying some outrageous things to their opponents, but most of the time, they don't actually mean it. It's just part of the act to build up the fight. And after the fight is over, you'll often see fighters hugging it out and acting like they're friends. But let's be real. That's also part of the show. It's all about creating a narrative to sell more tickets and pay-per-views. And to be successful in making more money, the UFC also engages in a fair bit of scripting when it comes to their matchmaking. So, while the organization doesn't fix fights, they do try to give rising stars a chance to showcase their skills. Sometimes the UFC will match up newer fighters with opponents who are less experienced or not as skilled. This isn't because the fights are fixed, but because the organization wants to give the newer fighters a better chance of winning and getting higher ratings. And some people have complained about this practice, especially when fighters like Khamzat Chimaev and Sean O'Malley have faced opponents who weren't as advanced. Because the UFC is just trying to help these up-and-coming fighters make a name for themselves in the sport. But unfortunately, there have been some fights in the past that were a little bit fishy. One example is the match between Oleg Taktarov and Anthony Macias at UFC 6. Taktarov won the tournament and beat Macias in just 9 seconds, which seems a little suspicious. Years later, Macias said that something wasn't right about the fight. He claimed that he was being pressured by his and Taktarov's manager to lose the battle. If Macias didn't throw the fight, the manager threatened that he would never get another chance to fight again. In another fight between Leo Kuntz and Tai-Hyun Bang, Bang was actually supposed to lose, even though he was trying his best to win. Why? Because members of the Yakuza Mafia had bet a lot of money on Kuntz to win, and they bribed Bang with $100,000 to make sure he lost. Even though Bang won the fight, according to the judges, he was still punished for taking the bribe and had to spend 10 months in prison in 2017. It just goes to show that even though the UFC itself doesn't arrange fixed fights, that there are still people out there who try to manipulate fights, especially through the use of illegal substances. So, if you've ever listened to Joe Rogan's podcast, you've probably heard him talk about substance abuse in the UFC. And let's be real, it's a problem. It's no secret that some fighters have been caught using performance-enhancing drugs. But here's the thing. The UFC has taken steps to address this issue. They have the USADA to test fighters for performance-enhancing drugs. And let me tell you, these guys do not mess around. They can show up unannounced at any time to test a fighter. But even with all these measures in place, there are still some who believe that the UFC is fake, that fighters are juicing up and putting on a show for the fans. Now, I'm not gonna sit here and say that every fight in the UFC is 100% legit, but it's important to remember that the actual fights themselves are not fake because the fighters are competing at a high level and putting their bodies on the line. Injuries and damage are very real, and that's what really counts, right? While there have certainly been moments where a fighter has appeared to take a dive or pull their punches, most fights in the UFC are highly competitive and intense. But I can't deny that marketing tactics are a huge part of the UFC, even if it is to promote some very real matches, drawing massive audiences and generating tons of attention. And that only goes to show that fans are equally interested in entertainment as they are in authentic competition. And that's all you need to know about the UFC being fake.